Hello, BookTube. Sorry for the long drought of videos. It's been a whole, 6 hours since I made one? I don't want to lapse into being an ordinary booktuber, but I've been assaulted on all sides by stuff. You ever have one of those days? I've been assaulted on all sides by stuff. Work, deadlines, people, and a puppy. I just looked at the clock and realized, oh my god, a day is going to go by without me vlogmasing. I can't have that. But it's late and I've got a ton of stuff to do. I don't know why, but I've got a ton of stuff to do. But I didn't want to let the day go. And there's a thing that's easy and fun to do, and that is the page 112 tag. That I love so much, that I've done many times on this channel, and I will continue to do it. I think it's a lot of fun. And for those of you who might not be familiar with it, it originates from a French literary prize in which the judges are given only page 112 of the entry books. And on the strength of page 112, they are to judge whether or not they want to see the rest of the book, based on what I think is the very sound assumption that most manuscripts are heavily polished by many hands in their beginnings. And then, as I think all of us as readers have experienced, things tend to fall apart after that, if they're going to fall apart at all. So page 112 is designed to get past that point and start reading the book in its underwear. And Shawn, the book maniac, a booktuber, I'll try to leave a link down below, came up with the idea of doing that as an informal sort of anti-tag for BookTube. Pick 3 books and read page 112 and then analyze what it is that you can tell from that one page. And the parameters of the tag have been all over the map. You can pick, older books that you know very well. You can pick older books that you haven't read. You can pick new books that you don't know anything about at all. Or, to be truest to the spirit of the tag, you can have someone send you, in one email, the 3 excerpts from page 112, and then in a separate email, the identifying titles of the books. So that way you are exactly mimicking the French prize that started all this whole rigmarole. And Shawn did that for me. He sent me 3 excerpts and then the 3 titles so that I could read the excerpts blind and then find out on camera what it was that I had read. And I thought that was so much fun that I asked him if he would send me 3 more excerpts, and he said, no. And I said, but why? And he said, because you smell. So I'm back to doing it just on my own. So I have 3 excerpts I'm going to read you here, and then we're going to talk about them. And then I will identify them for you. So here's the first one. Helen's eyes move from the alien to the flow of information tracking across the faceplate of her helmet. The G-forces are now pushing her eyeballs back into her head a bit, so this is tricky, but she manages. She can push enough air out of her lungs to communicate, confirming data back to mission control. Prime Space has pulled out all the stops for the Eidolon launch. They've been in sim mode since the 5 a.m. wake-up call. They had sims for when they waved goodbye to their families and colleagues from behind the sealed partition. Helen had no idea if that was her daughter or a simulated version of her daughter. And they had sims for when they enacted various departure rituals, including the old Russian one of peeing on the right tire of the vehicle, taking them to the launch pad. In Helen's case, emptying a vial of urine onto the tire. Very much a real tire and real urine, although the landscape outside the truck was virtual. They had sims for a long elevator ascent to their craft, considering that Primitus was sitting on a platform in the desert and not atop the Manus 5. The noise and motion of the quote-unquote elevator was especially impressive. And all along, Helen had been asking herself, does it feel real? Which is not a question she would be asking if it were real, and so the answer, on some level, must be no. And yet... now her eyeballs are going out instead of in. This will be the big rush when God steps and kicks their little football, and the sound of tarsal connecting with craft will be a mighty boom, and God's bulging thigh will shed his tights. Not nicey nice God, but Old Testament God, letting Job have it capable of large-scale smiting. And that's pretty good. That's immensely engaging. It very much shifts tone in the last paragraph there. It's almost like in the middle of that section, in the middle of that page, the author thinks, well, okay, perhaps I have dwelt too much on the whole sim business. I had better put in a dramatic flourish. But one way or another, the dramatic flourish, this is obviously a spacecraft taking off, right? And the dramatic flourish is, it might be an accident, but it's also directly in line with the first-hand accounts of every single person who has ever experienced such a thing, which is that God comes down and smites your craft. You're doing okay, you're doing normal, it's a normal thing until that moment, and then all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, G-forces and you are no longer friends. That's fun. That's fun to read. So now we'll go on to the next one. There's nothing I can do, she blurted out, trying to make her voice steely but failing on the last word. Her voice grew flaccid with despair and then tightened in fear. Brunetti, knowing there was no comfort he could give her, said, "You can cook something for your children to show them you're all right and life is normal." Before she could protest about the word, Brunetti said, "That's what they need, Signora. Their father is sick and in the hospital, but they need things to continue as close as how they were as you can make them." When he saw her prepare to speak, he kept talking. They might be teenagers, but they're still children. He stopped after that and watched as she considered what she had heard. She raised one hand but let it fall again, and then gave a dispirited shrug and said, "Perhaps." She turned and went into the room, leaving the door open for him. Gasparini was the same, save that the circles under his eyes were darker today, especially on the left side. Professora Crosera walked to the side of the bed, leaned over her husband, and pulled the covers up, though the room was hot enough to make Brunetti uncomfortable. She placed her hand lightly on her husband's cheek, as though it was morning at home, and she was going to let him sleep a bit more while she made some coffee or went out to get the morning paper so he could read it in bed the way he liked to. She picked up her coat and bag and walked over to Brunetti. "Quick, before I change my mind," she said, and walked out the door and down the corridor. Okay, so that's really good. That's really good too. There's all sorts of little gestures here that show a very seasoned author, an author who has learned to trust their readers, so they don't need to spell everything out for you. We see it twice in this segment. Up at the top at the very beginning, "There's nothing I can do," she blurted out, trying to make her voice steely but failing on the last word. That's acute. That's acute stagecrafting. That makes it real. Not only that her voice would fail, but that it would fail on the last word. You can cook something for your children to show them they're all right and life is normal. Before she could protest about the word, Brunetti went on, and we're not told what the word is because we already know. It's the word normal. That's going to hook at someone who's going through a trauma, which this person obviously is, and that's great. That we're told that we're let in on the conversation. That she is going to protest against the word. Sorry about the attack helicopter. There's trouble in the next town over. Also, I love the little gesture in the last paragraph. The man in bed is obviously ill. He's obviously unconscious. And yet, when she touches his cheek, we get a glimpse into their relationship. It's not heavy-handed, and it doesn't last too long. It's just one sentence. And then it's gone. But it invests that gesture with wonderful meaning. I loved it. I loved it. Now we're going to on to the third one, and then we'll discuss. We'll discuss amongst ourselves. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. Let's see here. "Diane," he whispered, eyes wide. "There are stairs behind the wall." Diane uttered a curse over the phone. Madeline actually told the truth. Bruce shivered, wondering why she would help him, wondering if perhaps she was trapping him instead. Don't go down there, Diane echoed his thoughts. Bruce could hear fear in her voice now. Whatever you find won't be good. He shook his head. I'm going. Keep an eye out up here. Let me know if you see anything suspicious. You'd better find something suspicious down there, she retorted. With all the trouble you're going to, you owe me big time. You owe me so much you'll be paying off loans for years. Bruce chuckled, then turned back around and wedged himself through the narrow opening, down into the gloom. It was slow going. The steps were narrow and high and wound down in a spiral. He stopped and tested his foothold at each step before putting his weight on it. Gradually he descended through the darkness, one stair after another, until his foot finally hit what felt like a concrete floor. He was in a narrow space, and the air here was tight, full of dust, and he forced down a cough. I'm at the bottom, he whispered, hoarse. Nearby, he could make out the dim outline of an abandoned construction barrier. Where the hell are you? I have no idea, Bruce whispered back. He stood up and lifted one arm slightly above his head, trying not to bump anything. His hand hit the ceiling. It felt rough, like unfinished concrete. He held out his phone in front of him and turned on its flashlight. The phone illuminated the space several feet ahead of him. It was a tunnel that led into pitch black. To Bruce, the tunnel reminded him of the narrow passageways in the cave near his family's estate, and the bats that sometimes poured out. He half expected them to come barreling toward him now. Okay. I think we'll in identifying the books, we'll start with the last one and move our way backwards, because that made things pretty obvious to any of you in the cheap seats. When you think about someone named Bruce, whose family estate had caves underneath it full of bats, you're probably thinking Batman, and you're right. This is Batman Nightwalker by Murray Liu. It's a new series. This publisher, Random House, is doing a series of hardcover YA releases starring DC superheroes as YA, as young adults. And this one stars, as you were probably able to intuit, a teenage Bruce Wayne. And that leads to a whole bunch of problems with that passage in and of itself. But we wouldn't know that. If we were doing the page 112 tag in France, we wouldn't know that. If we just judge the passage on its own right, then it's fairly straightforward adventure writing with one enormous problem, right? I'm sure you noticed it. One enormous problem. There is absolutely no logical reason in the context of the scene that we just read why the character Bruce wouldn't have turned on his flashlight at the beginning instead of at the very end. Why is he creeping down a spiral staircase without using a flashlight? And you can't possibly say that the reason is because he was worried about the light giving his location away, because he's in a spiral staircase. He's willing to do it in an open hallway at the bottom, but not in a spiral staircase on the way down, even though he can't see where he's going. So that plus, if a cat, I know we shouldn't hold the made-up stories to any semblance of reality. I don't know if you've noticed this in your reading, BookTube, but almost any piece of fiction, contemporary fiction that you read is going to be far less like reality than for instance, a really good science fiction will be. But needless to say, if you know someone and you're on the phone with them and they're going into a pitch black passageway behind a wall, you don't say, you'll owe me big time, you'll owe me so much, you'll be paying off for years. That's not the way people talk, especially in a circumstance like that. But so the passage has flaws on its own, but since we're talking about the books now, and so we're going in reverse order, we'll start with this one. Of course, the biggest problem of all with that passage is that it's supposed to be about Bruce Wayne, Batman. And Bruce Wayne becomes Batman because as a child, he sees his parents gunned down in an alley in a senseless act of violence. As a great writer puts it, that was the day that all sense left his life. Now, comic books have for 80 years kind of sort of avoided the lost Jesus years of Bruce Wayne. With Superman, it's completely different. Superman comes to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal man. And in the normal continuity, we won't talk about anything that has followed. In the normal continuity, he learns about those abilities as they're developing when he's a boy. He's helped through them by his father, and he dons his Superman costume as a teenager, as Superboy, the Boy of Steel, and starts solving all sorts of local crimes in Smallville. He hardly ever gains a wider reputation than that, except that in the Legion of Superheroes comic book, we learn from the Legion of Superheroes members in the 30th century that by then he's famous. All over the galaxy, he's famous. But anyway, with Superman, his career is in bright sunlight the whole time because he's too young to remember the trauma that he went through. By the time he's Superboy, he's had a normal Midwestern American upbringing. It isn't until his parents die that he has trauma all over again, that the Kents die. And in modern comic book continuity, Ma Kent never dies. she's still around, which is not exactly a development that I don't like. But the point is, comic book writers have tended never to make a definitive canonical version of what exactly happens to Bruce Wayne in between when his parents die and when he becomes Batman. Obviously, no one has ever made him a superhero in that time. It's not like there's Batboy. But we don't know where he got his training, we know that he has extensive training, but we don't know where he got it or how he got it or why he got it. But one thing we know for sure, right? In almost any version of the character, one thing we know for sure. When he was a teenager, he wasn't chuckling. The whole point of Batman is that he's damaged as a person. That's why he is in agony as a person. His sense of the world has warped, and he becomes Batman to right that sense of the world. So having him as a kind of happy-go-lucky YA protagonist who chuckles and makes jokes, I would be under the impression that Marie Lu has never read a Batman comic in her life, and when she got this commission, I'd be willing to bet that she read very little in the way of it, and just gave us a Bruce Wayne who is featured. I gotta show you this. He's featured in the included original poster. Hubba hubba. So I don't know that I think this might be the least successful of the three. Not only on its own merits. On its own merits, it has a, if we can read one page and there's a gaping procedural flaw, then what does that say about the rest of the book? Which I admit I have not read. I have had the advance copy for a while. I haven't read it. I had similarly dire feelings about Leigh Bardugo's Wonder Woman book and was pleasantly surprised. It was actually very good. So I suppose it's possible that this book will surprise me too. But I don't know. The thing, before we move on, before I continue, before I end this tedious digression, the thing about the DC Comics trio, their trinity of heroes, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, the thing about all three of them that comic book outsiders tend not to get is that they're immensely more complicated than they seem on the surface. That was the one thing that was missing from Leigh Bardugo's Wonder Woman book, is that complexity. We get a young Wonder Woman, a young seeming Wonder Woman in that book, but she's not terrifically different from the young people that she encounters out in man's world, and she would be. She was raised by a fanatical, all-female warrior cult. And the same thing is true with Bruce Wayne. With a teenage Clark Kent, maybe not so much. A teenage Clark Kent is a parents-respecting, hard-working, happy, well-adjusted Midwestern teenager who can crack a mountain open with his hands. But those two things are fairly ideologically separate. He's not a tortured figure. So he might fit well in a YA book, and he fit well in a YA TV series for 7 years. But Bruce Wayne? A YA Bruce Wayne is going to be the most brooding of brooding YA heroes. I don't think it works. The second one, I think, did work, very much so. And it's the name Brunetti will tip you off, most of you, to who it was. It's this. It's The Temptation of Forgiveness. It's the new Donna Leone Inspector Brunetti mystery set in Venice. Look at that cover. The water reflecting underneath a bridge in Venice. And this comes out in March. And I haven't read it except for that one page. I got to admit, I'm a big Inspector Brunetti fan. And that one page, of course, makes me want to read the rest of it. Brunetti is a very interesting character in that he avoids most of the cliches of the ongoing murder-solving policeman in most of the successful series in the mystery world. He avoids most of those cliches. He's deep without being tortured. He's well read without having major gaps in his reading or being snooty about it. He's happily married without any kind of dark clouds. He's professionally competent so that you don't get 80 pages into the book, and unlike in most Scandinavian crime-fighting fiction, police procedural fiction, you get to page 80 in an Inspector Brunetti mystery, and you're not wondering, why does this bumbling oaf even have a job on the police force, much less be a detective? I couldn't find his nose in the dark on his own face with both hands. That's not true with Brunetti. You are impressed by the subtlety of his understanding of human nature, and you can see it in that excerpt, where he tells a grieving woman to do the last thing on earth that she thinks to do, and the one thing on earth that she should do, which is go home and cook a meal. Present your children with a normal world because it's your duty as their parent to try to minimize the trauma to them while you handle it yourself. That's wonderful. And it's a, I mean, I admit this is one of the reasons why I kind of wish that Shawn had sent me excerpts blind that I didn't smell. Because I know going in to it, I couldn't not know that this was an Inspector Brunetti mystery when I read that bit of it. And I know what to expect from these books. They've never disappointed. The series has never disappointed me. So I really liked it, but it betrays the limitations of doing this yourself. The ideal form of the page 112 tag is to have someone send you excerpts and book titles in 2 separate emails, and then you go at it truly blind. And then the last one, the one about the G-forces and God smiting, is from a book that some of you will know, but you won't recognize it, unfortunately. It's The Wanderers by Meg Howry, which came out in a hardcover earlier in 2017 that did not look like this. I don't know what this is. This fever dream, ugly nightmare of a paperback cover. I have no idea why the extremely wonderful cover for The Wanderers in hardcover was changed. You would think that changing the cover would cost money. It almost certainly does. You had to commission something else. But yet, anyway, those of you who know the book will know that it centers around 3 astronauts who are going on a mission to Mars. But they're prepping for it on Earth, in the harshest conditions that Earth can provide. And we meet them, and we meet the people in concentric circles around them in their civilian life. And it's a tremendously impressive book, I thought. So I put it in the page 112 tag to see how it would stand up on just one page. And I liked it. I thought the whole book was impressive. I thought it got better as it went along, but page 112 is well done. The only problem that I would have with it, and I can attest to the fact that this problem crops up throughout the book, is that abrupt change in tone. That where you're doing a fairly normal, by the numbers, procedural narration of what's going on, and then all of a sudden you get a biblical exegesis, and then you go back to the normal astronaut stuff, and that happens throughout, where periodically Howry will take sort of a half step away back from her narrative and do something, reflect a little bigger, and then go back into the narrative. I'm not saying that she never does it bad enough to disrupt the reading experience. So I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely a tick that goes throughout the book. And we just happen to find it on page 112. So there you go. That's page 112 tag. That's 3 pieces of fiction. I didn't do nonfiction this time around, but I think I will next time. Unless I get sent excerpts. That would be nice. Be nice to be liked on BookTube. Anyway. So there you go. Let me know what you thought. Let me know which ones of these you liked the most. And I'll see you soon. I hope to see you tomorrow with my usual obnoxious number of videos instead of only one video. I'm hoping that tomorrow life leaves me alone so I can concentrate on my lame-ass booktube friends. We shall see. I will report back. Thank you, booktube.